HP's latest Omen gaming laptop comes in with a 17-inch screen, an i7 7820HK and a full-fat desktop grade GTX 1080, but with a price tag ranging from $2,500 to over $4,500, is it really worth all of that cash? Let's dive in and find out. The first thing that strikes you about this laptop is its size. It is massive. The huge 17-inch 144Hz 1080p screen on a laptop makes everything else look really quite small. You get a full-size keyboard with dedicated macro key row and number pad, and you also get a trackpad that seems pretty small when compared to the rest of this machine, but it's actually of a decent size. It's multi-touch and features dedicated left and right click mouse buttons, which whilst are a little bit dated are more tactile, so may work better for a gaming oriented laptop. Going back to the keyboard for a second though, you do of course get full RGB implementation, which can be controlled through HP's Omen software. You get a dedicated shortcut key on the keyboard to this, and this controls the macros and also the RGB all over this machine. From the X on the rear on the laptop lid to the light up strip behind the I/O. You also get the Omen logo which lights up and an RGB power button. Oh yes, that is a thing, it's completely bonkers. The keyboard is very nice, you get a lovely tactile sound and feedback with lower profile keys, striking a good balance between an actual mechanical keyboard and a thinner membrane keyboard which allows for more hardware to be crammed in and helps to keep size to a minimum. Inside this laptop you get a quad-core hyperthreaded i7 7820HK which comes in clocked at 2.9 GHz, and you also get a full-fat GTX 1080. Now HP claim this to be the world's first overclockable GTX 1080 laptop, and surprisingly enough I can attest to that being true, although there is one caveat. You can overclock the graphics card and the CPU here, and you can get a bit more leverage out of them with a bit more free performance, but I wouldn't personally recommend it. On a desk, on a table, that might be fine. You're hitting kind of low temperatures of 85, 86 Celsius on the graphics card, and 90 to 91 is pretty of a safe region to bump up to. But say you're playing this in bed, for example, or in a less than optimal airflow environment, such as on the sofa, you're going to see worse temperatures and you may see some thermal throttling if you decide to overclock. I'd just avoid it, increase the longevity of your components by not overclocking, as you're preventing them from getting hotter and colder more frequently, but surprisingly enough, their claim is true if you'd like to overclock. The CPU hits 55 to 65 degrees at idle and load respectively as well based on my testing, although your mileage may vary depending on of course airflow conditions. The laptop is also configurable with up to 32GB of DDR4 memory as well, which makes this thing a potentially fantastic video editing machine. You also get some unique storage configurations. You can go up to a 4TB SSD, although my unit features an SSD and a hard drive combo for a bit of a better value option, and also a good amount of mass storage for your Steam or Origin libraries, movies, music, games. You get the gist. But less about the insides, what about the design on the outside? And I think here it's very, very clever. HP have had a really difficult task making this thing not look bland and boring and really samey because it's so big. They've gone for a primarily metal construction, which does make this machine heavy. Very, very heavy, although the build quality is fantastic, from the hinges on the very heavy screen that seem firm, secure and don't seem like they're going to give in anytime soon, to the ventilation design which helps for airflow and cooling. You also get sharp edgy lines which help to break up the mammoth scale of this laptop, and the brushed aluminium finish, whilst it's a pain to clean, does look pretty quite nice. Pretty quite nice? If grammar has lost me today. Other cool features on this machine include an acrylic see-through window at the rear, which helps you peek through slightly to the motherboard. Nothing particularly exciting, but fairly nice nevertheless. And the superb webcam, it's actually really, really good for a laptop. With this machine packing in so much hardware, one thing I think is important to touch upon is the power brick. It's absolutely huge. Now there is a few arguments to be made back and forth here, but it is my biggest criticism of this machine. I can see why they needed a power brick this big because it's a 300-watt laptop. However, it definitely stints the arguments of portability. Travelling on a plane or a train with this laptop and its huge power brick seems nearly impossible. So why would anyone buy this laptop? I see it to be perfectly poised for people going to LAN parties or gaming events such as Insomnia here in the UK. Suddenly lugging around a 17-inch laptop and a large power brick doesn't seem quite so importable when compared to a desktop tower, a keyboard, a mouse, a headset, and of course a monitor. If you're going around to friends' houses gaming very regularly, or you're going to different events up and down the country, this thing could be a really great solution, and the I/O once again affirms that. From the mini DisplayPort and HDMI connections on the rear to the gigabit Ethernet, which allows you to get wired up for LAN events, for example, hassle-free, and also keeping those pings nice and low for competitive gaming experiences. Other I/O additions on this machine include a USB 3 Type A port on the left hand side with headphone mic jacks and a Kensington lock, as well as a USB 3 Type A and C connector on the rear, and a further USB 3 Type A connector, an SD card reader down the right hand side, which sit alongside the world's largest power jack. Having a really good I/O here makes this thing a real winner for me. You're able to edit on the move for video editors out there that need all that power with the SD card reader, and you're able to plug in a keyboard or a mouse and a headset all at once for gaming events using the full-size USB 3 ports on board. Jumping back into HP's excellent aforementioned Omen software, it really puts the cherry on top here for me. Having a good piece of software that works well and cohesively with the hardware on a machine is a real winner. From controls over the RGB on the 8 different RGB zones on this machine, I mean, you can even control each corner of the X on the rear and the power button and direction control for different effects. It's superb. You can also record macros for the designated macro row down the left hand side and do overclocking within this piece of software. You also get support for network management, so you're able to use Wi-Fi and Ethernet connections in conjunction with one another and prioritise different connections for different things, i.e. make sure that all your game connections go through the Ethernet port for lower lag and better latency when gaming to give you that competitive edge, if you will. Before we jump into the gaming benchmarks in today's video, which I know you're all waiting in high anticipation to see, it isn't all rainbows and unicorns. There are some things to note and a few negatives here. The first is the screen to body ratio. Maybe it's because I'm coming from my Dell XPS 15, which doesn't compete with this machine, don't get me wrong, it's a much more thin, lower power laptop, but I've become used to having really thin bezels for a really immersive experience. And this laptop's huge bezels on either side just make this thing feel even bigger than it already is and detract a bit for me from both the user experience and an aesthetics standpoint. I'm also a little bit unsure, to be completely honest, on the screen resolution and refresh rate choices made here. If I'm honest, I can understand that top-end CSGO players, for example, will want 144Hz panels on their laptops, but for people like me, a 1440p IPS panel might have looked a little bit better and would have helped to flex the muscles of that GTX 1080 a little bit further. 1080p just seems a little bit wasted to me. I mean, in an email they sent me prior to this review, they requested that I benchmarked games in this video in 1080p and 1440p, but what would be the point? Because it's got a 1080p screen and you're buying a laptop to avoid the use of a monitor, hence the forthcoming 1080p benchmarks. The final thing from me is a very minor one, it's the speakers. Branded as Bang & Olufsen, some people may expect some slightly better audio performance here, but they're really pretty crap. Laptop speakers tend to be crap because of form factors and because of the difficulty to generate really nice room-filling boomy bass. However, branding them as Bang & Olufsen doesn't help your cause, unfortunately. HP. Moaning aside though, let's jump into some benchmarks so you can see just how well this machine performs. Ridiculously impressive benchmarks aside, it's clear that this 1080 is capable of absolutely smashing any title you throw at it, ultra settings, whilst getting some fantastic frame rates. Now it begs the question to you, the consumer. Do you want a 1080p screen laptop with a 1080, or do you want to drop down to a lower spec graphics card and better display? Personally, I'll take a better display any day of the week, but that is choices up to you as the person that would be buying this machine. So finally, I'll rotate in a very circular fashion, cyclical fashion, back to my original point. Is this laptop worth it for the hefty price tag it entails? Yes it is. Now the reason I say that is because when you take into account the hardware in this machine, 16 gigs of RAM is $200, 144Hz display could be another $300, $400, $500. A quad-core hyperthreaded i7 might go for another $200 to $350. That's without taking into account SSDs and hard drives, power supplies, cooling, as well as the keyboard built into this unit, and fantastic design. It really is an expensive machine, but when compared to buying the parts outright for a much larger and much less portable desktop solution, it suddenly doesn't seem so bad. If you'd like to pick this machine up, I'll put links to it in the description below for a range of regions and retailers. For some exclusive photos and behind the scenes snippets, follow me on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. They're on your screen now. But as always, we'll see you in the next GeekaWhat video.